But when I get really afraid of losing all my money in the stock market, of getting sick, or losing a loved one, how do I handle that? Fear again. The question is about fear. How do I handle the fear of catching a disease, of losing many things? Many people are experiencing not only the fear now of the virus, they're also experiencing the fear of the repercussions of what's happening. Businesses are closing down, or everything is closing down. It's a very strange thing that this is happening. It's like an enforced closing down of the busyness, not just the business, but the busyness of the world, an enforced sudden ending of all that. Many planes are not flying anymore. And some cities are empty of people, or suddenly, as if because until this happened, the world was absurdly busy. Something after noisy, busy, everything was in movement. Everything was lost in the world, lost in the minds. And suddenly, as if somebody said, look, let's turn it off for a while. Oh, enforced stillness almost. Exactly what millions of humans actually need to experience. It doesn't mean that they will automatically also experience the inner stillness, but there is a possibility of an awakening for many if they can go beyond the fear, the fearful thoughts. But how do you go beyond the fearful thoughts? Well, it requires a little bit of awareness. But if you are here with us, you probably have that awareness. What I mean by that is the awareness of what's going on in your mind. To recognize, rather than total identification with what's going on in your mind, you have in the background an awareness of what's going on in your mind. Very different, because it's a different consciousness, a different dimension of consciousness, the awareness. It's not the same as a thought. The awareness can recognize what thoughts go on in your mind, and you realize, I'm thinking all these useless thoughts, but that realization, I'm verbalizing it now, but because we are communicating through language, but that realization that all these useless and destructive thoughts are going through my head, that is a realization that is not verbal, it's pre or post-verbal, because it comes through the awareness. And there's a simple recognition that what's going on in your mind is not helpful. It's making you fearful and unhappy. So it is to be tackled there. All these, the problem that he mentions, or he or she mentions 3, fear of losing all my money, or my savings, my investments, what I've been saving, of getting sick, or something bad could happen to a loved one. So you have fear for yourself, you have fear for others, and of course, all these things are not happening now, the things that you fear, but they could happen, says the mind. So I better think about it now, because in case it does, of course, if they did happen, you would face the situation. With the power of your conscious awareness, you would face the sickness, you would face the loss of money, and you would even face the loss of a loved one or the suffering of a loved one. With the power of your presence, you can face that. But what you cannot do, you cannot overcome these problems or face them because they only exist in your imagination. They haven't even happened yet. Therefore, there's absolutely nothing you can do about them. In fact, they will simply amplify. The more you think about them, the more they become amplified. It's a totally illusory realm that is making you suffer. And so if there's a minimum of awareness, you can suddenly become aware of what it is that you are doing to yourself. Well, it's not that you are voluntarily doing it to yourself, but one could say it is happening to you. So you become aware of what is happening to you, because the thoughts in your mind, virtually all the thoughts in the absence of awareness, happen to you. They are not voluntary. So people say, I think this, I think. You don't think, the thinking happens to you. When you're not aware, you're at the mercy of thought. You are at the mercy of the energy field that what we call thought. It lives in you. You are possessed. You don't know it. The moment you realize it, that this is not the fearful thinking, isn't something that you do, because if it's something that you do, you say, yeah, I'm doing it, but I can't stop it. No, you are not doing it. It happens to you. So some people say, well, perceive it as, well, why am I doing this to myself? Well, that's already, it's a good first step. Why am I making myself suffer by thinking all that? And then the next step is you realize, well, it's not really me doing it. It's the self-serving thought forms that are swirling around in my mind continuously, that are making me unhappy, that have no useful purpose. I'm not helping myself or anybody by thinking these things, by projecting bad things that could happen. And so with the awareness of what's going on in your mind comes the first time a moment of freedom. Because before you had no free will. Without awareness, you have no free will. You're at the mercy of a conditioned mind. So what do? So you have recognized that what's been happening to you fulfills no useful purpose. That's an important realization, because before there is an assumption in the unconscious mind that unless you worry a lot, then you're not controlling your life. There is the delusion that the more you think about useless, you don't know it's useless. The more you think about the problems of your life, then you need to continue thinking in order to hold it all together. You need to really worry, or the problem of the world. If you don't worry, then your life will fall to pieces. It's the underlying assumption. Of course, it's a delusion. So the worrying, the fearful thinking does not want to end. You need to know that it has a momentum. And you cannot fight it. If you fight it, you make it stronger. You give it added energy. So it's not by willpower that you can stop it, or as I just said, you can stop it briefly, but not for long, through exercising willpower. So you stop it simply by first recognizing not only the futility, but also the destructive nature of that type of thinking. And then you begin to see that a lot of the unhappiness is produced by the narratives in your mind. And at that moment, you have a choice. You can continue being dragged along in the stream of fearful thinking. Or you can say, my choice is now to take my attention away from fearful thinking. I'm verbalizing it. But where does it go? If the fearful thinking wants all your attention, it wants all your consciousness continuously. It says, no, I'm letting go, I want it. And then you say, no, I don't want to go that way anymore. It's very simple. You bring your attention somewhere else. You need something at first. My recommendation is feel your inner body. Direct your attention. Let's say you wake up in the night or in the morning. Direct your attention, instead of thinking, direct your attention into the inner energy field of your hands. And then you hold it there. Doesn't require willpower, it's just a simple decision. And you hold it. You feel the inner aliveness in your hands. Becomes an anchor for stepping out of mind, being present. Can you feel the energy in your hands? I can. And it's always wonderful. I've been feeling the energy in my hands for many years. It's always fresh and new. And I don't tire speaking of it, because it's always fresh and new. And of course, it's not just the hands. If you can't feel the energy in your hands, close your eyes and ask yourself if let's say your right hand, or if you're left-handed, your left hand. Ask yourself if your left or right hand is still there or not. Is it still there? How do I know it's there? How can I know it's there right now? No, you can't know it because you remember it was there when you saw it a few seconds ago. That's not knowing that it's there, because it might have disappeared. You close your eyes, you're not moving your hand. How can you know it's there? You can know it's there, but how does that happen? What is it? How do you know it? You can feel it, but what is it that you feel? You feel the energy within the hand. It's very subtle at first, so you need to be alert to feel it. But that alertness that then goes in the body is taken away from thinking, and you suddenly your hand feels more alive than it was before, and that's only the beginning. You can feel both hands simultaneously. And then you realize you can also feel other parts of the body, your feet at the same time, and legs. And then you become aware of a all-pervasive sense of aliveness in the entire body, energy field. Yep. And the amazing thing is, by the way, you may also become aware that you're breathing, because that's connected with the body. You're breathing into the body, and the breath flows in and it flows out, and the more you become aware of your body, the more you become aware of your breathing. The more you become aware of your breathing, the more you become aware of the body. There's a wonderful aliveness there. And what happened to your mind activity? It subsided almost completely or completely, because you cannot be aware of inner body and at the same time think. A few fragments may be there of thoughts, but not a sustained stream of thinking. It's not possible, because all your attention, your consciousness has gone away from the conceptualizing mind into the inner body. You're just trying to use me, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to be used anymore by you. This is it, that's it, and no more. That's another kind of no, but it's a low quality no. So I often say yes to the present moment. Or I say, make the present moment your friend, not your enemy. So to say yes to the present moment is a powerful teaching, but it can be misunderstood, and has been misunderstood sometimes, and it needs to be explained what that actually means. It means, oh, by the way, there's a funny movie made some years ago with Jim Carrey. It's called The Yes Man. And this is a person in the movie, the character he plays, he works at a bank, I think, in the mortgage department, and he's very bitter, and he likes to say no to people who apply for mortgages. No, you can't have it. He loves saying, and he's very negative about everything. No, his life is uneventful, boring. Everything is negative. Then he goes to a New Age. A friend invites him to a strange New Age event with a New Age teacher, and the teacher says, "You have to say yes, yes to everything. Say yes to everything," and he kind of becomes convinced that, well, I might as well try that. I've got nothing to lose. And from then on, whatever people ask him, every mortgage he approves. And whatever people ask him, can you lend me money? Sure, yes. Can you do this? Yes, yes, yes. And then his life becomes very interesting, but also very chaotic. He gets into most chaotic situations, and he kind of all gets out of hand. And in the end, he kind of seems to realize that this wasn't quite working. That is not the true meaning. So to say yes to the present moment does not mean that you accept everything that people ask of you. In some cases, you have to use the no, but not in an angry way that denies the present moment. I call that a high quality no. So let's say, in your case, can you look after my children? Or because I need you. You're so good with children. She'll flatter you. You feel obliged. You're such a wonderful person. I so love you. Can you do it again, please? And at some point, you have to. I'm sorry, I can't do it anymore. But without any negativity, a simple statement. It is not a reactive statement. You don't make her into a bad person I know you want to take advantage of me, I'm not doing it anymore. That is a low quality no. Even if perhaps she was trying to take advantage of you, but that may be then a dysfunction in her egoic self. Many humans do that. The world is full of people who perhaps are trying to take advantage of you. That's what the egos do. And so it's not who she truly is. But you do not speak to the ego in her. You simply say, I love your children, they're just wonderful, and I enjoyed my time, but I can't do it anymore. I'm sorry about that. High quality, no, I can't do that. A person says, can you lend me another $1,000? And you say, well, I've already lent you $2,000 3 months ago, and last year I lent you $5,000. I haven't got anything back yet. And then he's, I'm sorry, I have to say no. But you don't say, you're just trying to use me. And I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to be used anymore by you. This is it. That's it. No more. That's another kind of no, but it's a low quality no. The high quality no, sorry, that's it. I can't do that anymore. It implies there's a presence behind what you say. It's not reactive. And with the person who asks you to write something, you say, I've seen the background, I'm not in agreement with that, therefore I'm sorry, I need to say no to this, I can't do this, thank you. High quality, no, it's beautiful, and it works quite often. You may have to use that, make sure that it's not reactive, and then becomes low quality. If we say the world is crazy, are we judging? No. It actually is crazy. So how is that not a judgment? What judgment really means in spiritual terms is to equate something that you see in another, a deficiency, a characteristic that is regarded as not so good, to equate that with who that person is in their essence, their identity. If you see unconsciousness in another human being, which you can do easily, unconscious behavior, either in an individual human being, they get insanely angry, they get depressed, they misinterpret everything, they project their insecurities onto you, they project their fears onto somebody else, they make enemies everywhere, complete. And when it would be absurd to say, oh no, this person is fine, I'm not judging you. But you can clearly see that the behavior is totally irrational and insane and creates continuous suffering for themselves and others. So you see that. Whether or not you verbalize it is secondary, but you see it, and you might say this person is unconscious, which it does not mean you equate their behavior or what they do with who they are. If you make an identity out of it, then it's a judgment. So if I said human beings are crazy, that would probably be a judgment. But if I see their behavior as crazy and realize that is the egoic mind operating in them, they are manifesting behavior that corresponds to the present evolutionary stage of human consciousness. It is not who they are. It is the way in which they manifest the unconsciousness that is still part of the collective human consciousness. That's all. So basically the answer is when it's not equated with who they are, when you are not making an identity for them out of whatever behavior they manifest, then it's not a judgment. The judgment becomes when you say he is or she is such and such. He's a liar, let's say that. He's a liar. That's a judgment. He often lies is not a judgment. Because you can see that the lying is something that is a manifestation of his egoic state of consciousness for him. He believes, presumably, that he can gain some advantage from telling things that are not true, enhancing himself or whatever. Many egos say things that are not true to enhance themselves, for example. But the moment I make it into an identity, he is a liar, that's a huge trap I have put myself in, not just him, I've put myself in, because I've made an identity for another human being out of their unconscious behavior. Once I've done that, once I have attached a huge label, mental label, onto another human being, next time I meet this human being, I'm not really meeting them anymore. I'm meeting my judgment. I'm looking at them through the screen of the label that I have already given them, that I've mentioned to others. Do you know what you know that he's a liar, don't you? Yeah, okay, yeah. Next time he comes, you're not meeting a human being, you're meeting a liar. And by doing that, you have yourself reduced yourself. You get trapped in your own judgments. The way in which you relate to this person is diminished. You're not relating freely anymore to that person. You yourself become constrained by your judgments, because it will then control this, the mental concept will control your behavior towards him also. So, that's why I believe it was Jesus said, when you judge, you judge yourself, or something like that. So there we need to be careful when we make pronouncements about others, when we transform their behavior that we deem unconscious into an identity for them. Now that becomes extreme when somebody is extremely unconscious. Even then it applies. He's a thief. Now it may be true that his living is by stealing things, but you need to be careful with these things, because it could be that this person suddenly realizes, perhaps in prison, realizes the transcendent dimension in him or her and wakes up. And even a murderer could wake up, and it has happened and does happen, that if they suffer enough, as they will, a moment comes, not necessarily in this lifetime, but for some it has come, they wake up. People who have murdered even more than one person, they wake up and suddenly the unconditioned consciousness emerges, and it emerges because the suffering that they inflicted not only on others but on themselves through their actions was so extreme that the ego self-destructed. And then something emerges and suddenly they wake up. Now, therefore I would say even to call someone a murderer is a judgment. But to say that, to recognize that this person may be dangerous, even to you, that he may need to be confined to prison because he's a danger to others, that's the case. But to impose, to make an identity, nobody is incapable of waking up. Even seemingly very evil people sometimes awaken, only through intense suffering in their case. But anytime we make an identity for a person out of something that they do, that becomes a huge limitation that we impose on them and on ourselves. So you see clearly what a person does, but it's not what this person essentially is. And the same applies to groups of people or humanity as a whole. If we say the world is crazy, which means, of course, human beings, the human beings are crazy, what we are saying is many human beings alive on this planet are still unconscious and manifest behavior that corresponds to their unconsciousness. They create suffering for themselves and others, and they know not what they do. And then when you hear this in the religious book, it says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Really, forgive them means don't make an identity for them out of what they do. But don't deny it either. You don't say, oh no, this is fine, he just kills people, he's okay. So the deeper meaning of forgiving somebody is to recognize that in essence that's not who they are, which does not mean that they do not have to suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness. That happens by itself. And sometimes the karmic consequences of a person's deep unconsciousness may come through the judicial system, and sometimes through other ways. Not that the judicial system is always just. So while you're here, if you have little things that take you out of your comfort zone, for example, the chairs are quite close together, so you may find this isn't so comfortable. I came in this afternoon and I tried the chairs. And I sat next to someone. I just wanted to see what it feels like. And it could take you just a little bit out of your comfort zone. And you could say, I wish I had more space, but you don't. And here you can start with little things like that. That's just what is in the present moment. If your mind comments on it and says, this isn't how it should be, then you can see that ultimately is what takes you out of the comfort zone. It's not the fact that there is not that much room on the left and your right, that the ultimate comfort zone is the physical. There's a physical element to it, yes, but there's a larger element to it that is mental, that is the mind. So in many, many situations, when you're taken out of your comfort zone, the physical element there may be some where the physical is very strong, but in many other situations, the physical element where something that's actually happening is not the main thing that takes you out of the comfort zone. It's the mind, the mental commentary about what's going on, that really brings about this state of frustration, of anger, of resentment, of complaining, of wanting to argue. And if you cannot tell the difference between what it is that causes your frustration and your unhappiness, is it the situation? And I've often said it, but I'm not the first person to say it. I believe the first person was probably the little-known philosopher Epictetus, who lived like 2,000 years ago. And he was the first to literally point out, look at when you're unhappy, are you unhappy because of what's going on? Or are you unhappy because of what your mind is telling you about what's going on? And that is such a fundamental truth that even nowadays, millions on the planet have no idea of that, how powerful that realization could be to transform your life. This one realization that a large part of your happiness, the greater part of your happiness, is not caused by situations around you, or conditions, or even people. The greater part of your unhappiness is caused by a mental commentary about situations or other people or conditions that you find yourself in. If such a fundamental truth about the origin of unhappiness, such a fundamental truth, nobody teaches that at schools. That would be the most important thing for anybody to learn, and such a simple thing, because anybody can verify it in their own experience immediately. The moment they become upset, the moment you become unhappy, says, that's to do with my reaction, and my reaction is what my mind is commenting. What is it? And the confusion of mistaking your mental commentary for reality is a very serious mental illness. So you cannot say that here's the situation and here's what I'm saying about the situation. And then once you have a mental commentary, you experience emotions that reflect what your mind is saying. And then once this happens and you realize, then you realize as the Buddha said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering, which means I show you how suffering arises and I show you how suffering can come to an end. He's talking about psychological suffering, which is a huge part, the greater part of human suffering. Really, all suffering is psychological. That is just pain, physical discomfort. That, of course, exists. Unhappiness is mind-made. So the little thing to, once you realize that, and this is something perhaps that you could tell your relatives or family members or friends who are not open to anything so-called spiritual. At some point, you might be able to mention something when they get upset. You have to be careful with how you do it. Choose the right moment, or you better to tell them what you realize. Don't tell them you should do this or you should do that. Give them a little story about what happened to you when you were getting upset about something and what you suddenly realized. And when you dropped your mental commentary about the situation was actually okay as it was. So little stories can sometimes be better than telling a person that they should change something that they are doing. And of course that implies something very deep. Once you realize this truth, it implies that gradually you relinquish unnecessary commentaries as you go through your daily life. Gradually you let go of adding unnecessary mental commentaries to what's going on around you. And suddenly there's a total shift in how you experience life. Without the, as I sometimes call it, without the excess baggage of ultimately dysfunctional mental commentaries that make the life of millions of people on the planet miserable. I know that pain exists on a physical level, but there's a huge amount of suffering in humans everywhere, in all cultures. It does not have to be like that. So the implications are vast. At first you recognize, yes, it's just a mental commentary as you're standing in the line up at the supermarket and you got irritated, and then you notice irritation is a form of unhappiness, a minor form of unhappiness. Why am I unhappy? I'm unhappy because I don't want to be standing here and waiting for so long. I'm unhappy because these people are so inefficient and they haven't been trained properly. That's why I'm unhappy. I'm unhappy because I don't want to be doing my shopping after a day's work. Why should I have to do that? That's why I'm unhappy. I'm unhappy because there's not enough time now for me to get home and do the cooking. There's not enough. I'm unhappy because I'd rather be somewhere else, relaxing than standing here in this awful place, surrounded by these dreadful people. That's why I'm unhappy. It all sounds so plausible. And yet you have mixed up mental stuff with the simplicity of a situation of standing somewhere in the vertical position and looking around and breathing. What is wrong with this moment? I'm standing here, I'm breathing, and I'm looking around at the people and the things and the stuff. It's full of good things that you can buy. You don't have to go out hunting and stuff like that. I'm looking at all this magnificence of stuff. What's wrong with? And I'm standing here and, okay, I wish I could stand here for a little longer. you're no longer confusing mental stuff with the actual situation. And when you realize life then flows with much greater ease when you relinquish these unnecessary and absurd commentaries, that also means the amount of thinking that you do as you go through your daily life diminishes somewhat, because a lot of the overthinking that people do is of the complaining negative kind, where they have negative commentaries about things that are happening in their lives. That contributes an enormous amount to the overthinking that people do. Overthinking means an excessive amount of thinking that fulfills no purpose except to strengthen a false sense of self by strengthening the illusion of separation between yourself and the rest of the world, between yourself and others, but otherwise fulfills no useful purpose except to strengthen your ego and to make you more unhappy. And by making you more unhappy, strengthening your ego. Because the greatest egos are unhappy. The more unhappy you are, the bigger the ego. Happy egos find it difficult to survive. So the happiness in the presence of the ego, in the presence of happiness, feels threatened. And the ego, therefore, cannot tolerate happiness for very long. And if the ego is put in the unfortunate position where everything is so nice around for a little while, that what possible cause could I have to be unhappy in this situation? It will come up with some mental stuff. It will project another situation that's going to happen, that's going to make me unhappy. Or it will project an end to this situation. It might project even just a story in your mind where you're arguing with somebody. And so it will always find the unhappiness that it needs to survive. So that, to just add a practical afterthought to this, if possible at all, do not resent encountering difficulties or problems in your life, because that's how it works. And it doesn't stop even if you awaken. Even if you're awakened, there's still things that you get challenged further. Everybody gets challenged by life in one way or another. You can't, even the trust fund baby gets challenged by life eventually. So when you encounter difficulties, small or big, see if you don't say, this should not be happening. This is the underlying attitude. If that's your underlying attitude, you're in a state of resistance. For example, many difficulties come in the form of other humans. Humans are difficult. You might have noticed. Many. So they come in the form of other humans. And then the underlying mindset for many people is, this shouldn't be happening. These people shouldn't behave like that. What we're really saying is they should be enlightened. Why aren't they? Well, what about you? So difficulties come in the form of other humans, and then you see, this is meant to be. You're meant to be challenged by other humans, and you cannot not be challenged. No matter how conscious you are, you will encounter other humans who are not, or not yet. And they will try to create problems for you, and sometimes they achieve that. It is true also that you attract fewer unconscious humans into your life as you awaken more. The awakening it is true that you're not going to move in circles where you're surrounded by completely unconscious humans, but you cannot totally avoid contact with unconscious humans. In fact, they need to come into your field of consciousness because they can be helped in many cases by being in your field of consciousness. But they can only be helped if you do not react when you encounter them. If you say, you do what you have to do, but you don't, the underlying mindset is not, this shouldn't be, they shouldn't do that, they should know better. Well, they don't. So then other difficulties come in other ways, because you can encounter, so we just really talked about relationship. If other humans means relationships. They can be the intimate relationships of people living together, there can be relationships of people working together, other kinds of relationships. Then, this already makes up for a lot of problems that people face, is relationship problems. Oh. And then you have others. If you don't have relationship problems, then life says, okay, I'll give him or her something else. Then you have a work problem at work, usually connected with relationship too, but maybe some additional factors. Or you have a health problem. So you have a problem where you live, you have a financial problem. That's a big one for many. Not enough. Or maybe it is enough, but your mind says it's not enough. Who knows? Shortage. The problem of losing your job, the problem of insecurity, which isn't a problem unless you think you should have security, that life is insecure, you don't know what's going to happen next to you. That can be a huge challenge. But once you accept that, actually insecurity can contribute, if you no longer fight it, if you don't demand that your life should be secure, it can contribute to the arising of presence, because it forces you more into the present moment. Insecurity means you go into the future and see you can't control it anymore. You don't know what's going to happen next. Oh dear, I wish I had a secure job, a secure income, a secure family environment. I wish I had a secure pension plan. I wish I had a secure life insurance. I wish I had secure this and secure that. Then I would be okay. Of course, you wouldn't. These things are, if you remove the element of risk or insecurity from a person's life, this is similar to the trust fund baby, then you remove one of the most important areas where you can grow by being challenged. So sometimes the emphasis in our societies in the West is too much on security these days. I mentioned somewhere before, I read last year, I was going by a school, secondary school, and it was the beginning of the summer vacation, and they have a big sign outside where there's always notices, they post notices, and then on that big sign at the school it said, "Have a great vacation, be safe." That sounds reasonable advice, because you don't want to be unsafe, but is that the main thing of your vacation? You come back after the summer, the teacher asks you and say, "I was really safe." What did you do? "I didn't leave my room because I wanted to be really safe." So life again needs to be a balance between security and risk-taking and accepting the basic insecurity of all life. When I wrote The Power of Now, I was already in my late 40s, and I didn't have a home anymore. That wasn't the original time when I didn't have a home, because after the original time I did have a home, but then I let go of it, and then I had a limited amount of money, as I briefly mentioned in the book, to finish the book. What would happen after that? In my late 40s, no life insurance, no job prospects, no income, no savings, except those that were running out, no home, no relationship even, nothing. So, and that insecurity contributed to the intensity of presence through which the book came. It could have led to fear, and it could have blocked me if I had demanded that my life should be more secure than it is. But I did not demand that security. I accepted the insecurity, and it became enormous presence. Because all security has to do with future orientation. So the more you have future orientation, the more insecure you feel, because you cannot control the outcome. So the fact that my money was running out, that I had no home of my own anymore, I was just going from place to place, contributed to the energy behind the writing and the book. So that's a wonderful thing. Some people cannot take that step. They feel that step into the unknown. The impulse that came to me was so strong at the time when I knew I had to leave England for a reason I didn't know, and I had to move to the west coast of North America, didn't know why, but the impulse was so strong I had to obey it. Well, I didn't have to, but I did. But I'm sure if I had not obeyed that impulse, which didn't just come once, it was there every day, I would have probably fallen ill and maybe would be dead already by now. So the life demanded that I step out into the unknown. If that is the case with you, then you know what to do. Without being rash about it, you still need to look at the practicalities. So insecurity is one of the great challenges, wonderful. And all these things, of course, life insurance, these are just illusions. How can you insure your life? First of all, life insurance isn't life insurance, it's death insurance, because that's what it is about. They just don't call it death insurance because nobody would want to buy it. So the universe, the one consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is awakening in every human. And every human's essential identity is that one consciousness. So it's not a personal thing, because if you think yourself only as a person, then you have the delusion that you're an autonomous entity cut off from everything and everybody else. But you're not an autonomous entity, you are just a cell in this vastness. And for a few years, the cell gives itself a name, or is given a name. So and so, that's me. Me. It really changes your life when the way you feel, you sense your own life to be. If you are the awakening consciousness in this body. It's wonderful. This mind-made sense of self is also much more focused on the negative than the positive. To be free, you awaken to who you are beyond your history and your life situation.
Hi, Eckhart. My question has two parts. It's what is the purpose of mental illness? how can something that is consciousness depriving have its necessary place and function?
Okay. Somebody, or perhaps it was me, probably said that everything has its necessary place.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in the larger context, if you look around the world, it's not only mental illness, which exists in different gradations, mental illness in its acute form, where it is recognized as mental illness in its less acute form, where we call it neurosis, whatever, and mental illness, well, neurosis already is normal, so mental illness in its normal form, which is normal human consciousness, the world is full of seemingly consciousness blocking events, all the suffering. You say, what purpose could that possibly have? For example, you could say, what purpose could human beings killing each other in the 20th century alone, human beings killing not 100 million, as I said in The Power of Now, that was a mistake, I've realized later, but closer to 170 million people killed in the 20th century alone, humans killing other humans. 170 million. Nobody knows the exact figure, but that's 170 million killed. What purpose can that possibly have? You can ask also. That's all that suffering can't possibly have a purpose, can it? And then all the other things that you have, young children dying in accidents or illnesses, or all kinds of things that seem to be blocking consciousness, people trapped in dreadful conditions, slave-like conditions still in many parts of the world, and it was like that until recently even in the Western world, trapped and not totally deprived of freedom. All these things that seem to block the arising of the flowering of consciousness. And particularly if you look at it in isolation. But it does seem that, first of all, a misperception arises when we look at a human being as if he or she were an entirely autonomous entity. In other words, as if he or she, the life that he or she has were his or her own life. Because then you then look at everybody as an autonomous life form without realizing that all life forms and all humans are a temporary expression of the one life. The life in you, or the consciousness in you, is the consciousness in me, the same consciousness, expressing itself in a different form. And there is something happening in this universe which is consciousness coming into the world of form and expressing itself more and more fully through the world of form. But it is always the one consciousness, assuming billions of life forms constantly. But the human thinks, that's me, that's my life. No, it's life. It's not my consciousness. I don't have my consciousess. It's the one consciousness, the one in the many. So all life is one. So when something seemingly dreadful happens, on one level it is always dreadful. Nobody can say that humans killing 180 million of their fellow humans is not dreadful on that level. But if you go to a deeper level, you see that something is emerging, and for some reason it is through, in many cases, seemingly being blocked here and there, that the consciousness is emerging more fully. That also has its place. You can't see it when you look at individual cases, but when you look at the totality of consciousness wanting to emerge, yet finding seemingly obstacles everywhere. But it's through the obstacles that the flowering actually happens. And so you might say, oh, isn't it unfair that this person represents a greater obstacle than another person? But it's the essence of any person is the one consciousness. So nothing is lost ever. And in so-called mental illness, there's also something to be learned by the one consciousness. What it is, I don't know, but I do know that a certain percentage of mental illnesses are a rising of consciousness that has gone slightly wrong, that hasn't gone, or is unrecognized. There are people in India who have become saints and masters who would have been put in a mental home in the West, because the West doesn't recognize certain things, that's this spiritual rising. Unfortunately, they were not born in the West, but there are probably many people in the West. I'm not saying that all mental illness is a misinterpretation, a non-recognition of awakening process, but ultimately everything is part of the awakening process. And why do I know all these things? You know things by looking at your own life, and I know that all the things that seem to block the full arising of consciousness in my life, and I'm sure you can find the same in your life, all the seeming obstacles to living a life of fullness and ease and greater awareness, ultimately all those things actually led to the arising, to the awakening. When I look at my own life, and my own life is only a microcosm of the collective, it must be. Then I see all the blockages and all the suffering actually was part of the awakening, without which it would not have happened. And collectively, the suffering of humanity in so many forms is also, unfortunately, a necessary part of the awakening. But realize that what we see as somebody's personal identity is not who they are. They are an expression of the one which is constantly finding new channels through which to express itself in this world. So if this channel is blocked, we see it as a person who is suffering. That's also true on one level. And of course you help if you are there, you give whatever help you can, that's part of it. But there's that personal sense of self is ultimately an illusion, because who you are is ultimately timeless and beyond the person. So I know that if I had not encountered all these seeming blockages in my life, I wouldn't be sitting here now. And if you had not suffered what you suffered, you wouldn't be here now. And so the obstacles to the arising of consciousness are ultimately part of the arising consciousness. And there's only one life. And that's a liberating thing to know, that the life in you, the life in me, is the one life. And if I die at this moment, nothing is really lost. If you die, nothing is lost. So we need to get away from the misperception that you have your life and it's a unique thing, and you are an expression of the one, and everybody is. And so humanity as a whole is awakening. And there's a term in the Bible which says the birth pangs of the new age. The birth pangs, when before giving birth there's a pain. So these are the birth pangs of the awakening. And it all, if you could see the totality, that also would make sense. It doesn't mean that killing 180 million is okay. Recognizing that it is insanity is part of the awakening. The recognition of that as insanity, that collective part of the collective insanity, that's part of the awakening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if you're new to this, you're going to wonder, what's he waiting for? Or, when are we going to start? And of course, the implication behind that question is that meditation is something that you do. And that's a fallacy of many meditators. Then meditation becomes just another doing. And you can put it in your schedule somewhere after all the appointments and whatever you have to do, then you do the meditation. But meditation is really about finding the dimension of depth in yourself, which is not a doing, it's discovering or sensing a deeper level within yourself, which we could call being. Now, you can't really do anything to find being, because being is prior to doing. And it's always already there as the essence of all life, including the essence of yourself. And now again, if you're new to this, you may wonder, what's he talking about? How do I find being? Being is all-pervasive, but because it's so all-pervasive, it's so easy to overlook. Just as easy as it is for a fish to overlook the eternal fact of water, because it's so all-pervasive. And so the fish says, water, I've never seen it. I've looked everywhere. So what does that mean, this analogy? There's something all-pervasive that is both within and without. And that is the essence of who you are. And that is where your sense of identity ultimately derives from. So as we sit here together, can you become aware of the simple fact that you are? The fact of being, the fact that I am. Right now. To give you another pointer, can you become aware of your own presence here, without which there would be no sounds to listen to? There would be nothing to see. What is it that makes the listening and the seeing possible? That's the dimension of depth. That's ultimately where your sense of identity comes from. You can't define it, it just is. You just are. When you become aware of that, all that it really means is not so much that you become aware of something, but you become aware of the fact of awareness. Still, when I put it into language, it still seems as if you were aware of something, because that's how a sentence is constructed, subject and object. But that's not the reality of it. The reality of it is awareness becomes aware of itself. It's not two, but one. And awareness is consciousness. Consciousness that has become aware of itself. And that's so all-pervasive, that's always in the background of your life as a deeper sense of I am, or of beingness, or of presence. But you get distracted and seduced by all the things that happen and that you do, and continuously consciousness identifies and gets attached to all the things that occur, especially the thoughts in your mind, consciousness becomes seduced into losing itself in every thought. And then you don't know who you are anymore. You get a false sense of identity, and you don't feel enough, and you feel there's something missing, and that you need more to grow in your sense of identity, and it never is enough. And here, in the dimension of depth, you are already enough. There's already a sense of completion, of fullness and aliveness. You don't need to become more alive. You're already alive. So another way of putting it is you become aware of the very aliveness that you are, the life that you are, which is one with the totality of life, the one life. When I meditate, extreme fear often arises in my mind. I feel like I would be destroyed or completely disappear, so I stop meditation because of the fear. I'm so afraid to keep going on, although I intuitively know that bearing the fear would get me closer to enlightenment. How can I conquer this fear? This is, yes, of course, the fear of the person, the personalized sense of self or the ego, which can feel threatened by the arising awareness. And once you know that, you can still meditate and allow the fear to be there. It's only when you try to run away from the fear that really it becomes a great obstacle. But if you can be with the fear, allow the fear to be there, as on a pure energy level, feel the fear, then you will find it begins to dissolve. So rather than not wanting to feel it, allow yourself to feel it. Then this is the beginning of change. If you always run away from it, then it'll linger. There's no change. There's a book called, I think, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, or something like that. But that is quite good advice, although, I mean, not applied necessarily to everything. I'm going to jump off now. But to allow yourself to feel whatever feeling comes is part of the present, the isness of the present moment. So if the fear arises, but then you also realize what is the fear created by a thought? You will know that. Or is the fear arising just by itself in a particular situation when you become still? Do you have a fear of silence? Do you feel uncomfortable when you go into a room and there's no noise in it? Some people do feel. Some people are uncomfortable in nature. It's not noisy enough. So, see, it may be that the fear arises when you become still, you meditate. Then it's not necessarily associated with a thought, but with that arising of awareness. And instead of stopping your meditation, just what happens if I just carry on and make the fear into a meditation, meditate on the fear. So if you do meditate, nothing really can disturb you. The good meditator incorporates whatever arises in the present moment into the meditation, including the most irritating noise that suddenly starts up outside. And the mind says, I can't meditate now. I need stillness. And then you realize, no, perhaps this is part of the meditation. And how does it become part of the meditation? by allowing the isness of this moment, which is that by just letting go of resistance, allow whatever it is to be. And if it comes from within, fear, anxiety, you allow that to be. But you have to be careful that it doesn't become a thought, because the moment you are drawn back into thinking, that's the end of your meditation. You can allow a thought to be there, but in order to allow a thought to be there, that implies that there is some awareness there behind the thought, so you are still there. If so, to be able, it's a wonderful thing. You allow the thought to be there. It's very different from being drawn into the thought and following it where it wants to take you. Of course, that's the end of your meditation or your mindfulness or whatever you want to call it. I don't use mindfulness, as you know, because it's not about a full mind. That's why I avoid the word mindfulness. But mindfulness is a lovely thing. It's really presence. So you can follow a thought, it grabs you, it grabs all your attention and pulls you along, that's one way. Or you can realize there's a thought arising about what my ex-spouse did 5 years ago to me while I'm meditating. And you can allow the thought to arise and be aware. And if you do that instead of being pulled into it, then you will find that it arises and it subsides. So then it becomes very much like the sky. Let's say you have a blue sky and clouds occasionally come. So the clouds are the thoughts that arise in the mind. The blue sky, the vastness of that space, is your awareness. So clouds are not a problem if within the larger context of the aware presence. They come and go. And there might be thoughts that say ridiculous things. There might be a thought about, I'd like to eat apple pie now. I really need to eat apple pie. There might ask the most absurd things to interrupt your meditation. Then you imagine an apple pie you're eating. And then there's the thought of apple pie. You allow that to be. You don't get drawn into the apple pie thought, or even suddenly you have to get up and run to the fridge to see if there's an apple pie still in there. So the thought arises, you are the sky, that's the awareness, and the thought is what comes into the awareness. Now, if more and more thoughts come, or if you follow one of the cloud thoughts that drift into the space of awareness, one of the cloud thoughts, and you suddenly go, it grabs hold of you and you follow it. Then the cloud gets bigger. Then it attracts other clouds that correspond to it. They suddenly come from out of nowhere. And then you are in a big cloud. You're still sitting there trying to meditate, but you're really in a big cloud of thought. And before you know it, the entire sky is cloudy, totally overcast. Now, of course, there's still some light shining through the clouds, but you no longer know where that comes from. There's some light, of course, consciousness. Thought cannot exist without consciousness. Thought is a manifestation of consciousness. But, so there's the consciousness that is behind the thoughts, but you no longer know that consciousness directly, only through the filter of thoughts, in the same way that you don't know the sunlight anymore except through the filter of the clouds.
My question is around, before you were talking about intensification of presence. So at times I've felt intense energy in my body, throughout my body, but that's more rare. And it's I feel that I experience presence in more of an underlying calmness. So my question is presence experienced is there something consistent with presence?
Do you mean, does it always feel the same? Is that what you mean, perhaps? Well, as I said, the intensity of presence can vary. So presence is the energy field. Now, this is very hard to talk about, but I will make an attempt. It is almost as if there's a place inside from where presence emanates. And that place is timeless, and I can only compare it in the sense-perceived world. You could compare it to this, like the sun that continuously shines, and yet it has no form. So it's like a space, rather, out of which presence emanates. So the sun isn't actually positive presence, but if you imagine that the sun were an empty space out of which the light emanates, then you get a better, this is closer to the truth of how it is experienced as you go very deeply into it. So there is a space within, or a spaciousness, that is the point out of which the emanation of presence happens. And that space is absolute repose, absolute stillness, and to feel that in yourself is very joyful, for lack of a better word. There's an aliveness there, but it is absolutely still. That's the core, and that is, perhaps as I speak of it, you can get a sense within yourself what that is. You can only sense it when you're not thinking. You can't be thinking and sense that. That's the innermost stillness within you. Out of that emanates presence, which can emanate directly from the body, can also move into your mind and begin to use your mind and inform the mind and speak through the mind. There were times in my life when I was very passive. You know my episodes on sitting on park benches, but even after that, for long periods of time, I was so immersed in that inner stillness that there seemed no point in doing anything. And you don't need to go that way. I didn't have any guidance, so nobody could tell me what to do with that. So I gradually had to learn for myself that you can be active in the world and at the same time completely rooted in the stillness. So you particularly mentioned the state of calmness when you can feel it. So it may be that you have that connectedness with the still point within and feel that very strongly. It's very hard for people to, people also differ in their choice of words when they speak about it. So you could ask, if you go to India or you go to any Buddhist country, you may find that, ask them about spiritual awakening, you may find that the words they use to describe it are very, very different. And only if you know already from direct experience what it is they're talking about, you can recognize that they're talking about the same thing. So I've already said too much about it, because what I have said those words may not be what the words that you would choose to talk about your experience of presence. So are you able to suspend thinking for certain moments without going to sleep?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
I think so.
Try it now. Okay, stop. Okay, how was that?
I don't remember a thought.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there was no thought.
Yeah.
Because not thinking is not memorable.
Okay.
Now, this is very significant. So the mind doesn't know what to do with not thinking because the mind is thought. The mind cannot really appreciate how important not thinking is because what the mind is interested in is, let me ask another question. That's what the mind is interested in. It's not interested in stepping aside and allowing no thought to arise. So the mind has a certain momentum. The most important thing is to become familiar with that state of no thought. Far more important than any question that could arise in your mind or any answer that the greatest spiritual teacher could give you. So that's why I mentioned I believe in the New Earth, I was visiting that big center where they offer countless fascinating courses on developing this and that faculty and spiritual development and physical development, and all kinds of huge number of courses are offered. You can have anything, a menu of courses, you can pursue any interest, wonderful and fascinating. So I don't know if you remember reading it, I wrote, somebody came to me and showed me that program, that menu of fascinating courses and workshops. I said, which one do you think is most suitable for me? And I looked through and said, there's so many, I don't know. But I can tell you this, the way I put it at that time was, be aware of your breathing just for a few days, and you will gain more than attending any of these courses. And it's free. Be aware of your breath as you go through daily life as much as you can. What does that imply? That implies there's a space of no thought, because you cannot be aware of your breath and think at the same time. If you want rapid acceleration of spiritual awakening, don't ask another question, because the next question and the next and the next won't get you any closer, especially after, as you can see, I'm winding down question. Especially after being here for several days, I have said all that can be said about spiritual awakening. The next step is up to you, and it does not consist in, let me see. No, I need to know something else. I need to know. I know that some questions are helpful because but ultimately, the most essential thing is bring presence into your life now. For example, by being aware of your breath as much as you can. This is one way of bringing presence in. Or feel the inner body as much as you can. And that's rapid. Or if you can, just step out of thought already without using any of those portals, just move out of thought. And some of you can do that already. Then choose that as much as possible in your daily life. Choose to be in thoughtless awareness whenever you don't actually need to think. And that's quite a lot of the time. That's the spiritual practice. There's no other spiritual practice. Everything else would point to that. But this is the most direct spiritual practice. And very rapidly you'll find the shift happening. You have a choice. Now, with choice comes responsibility, because the moment you have that choice, it implies that there is sufficient awareness in you for you to have choice. Once that has arisen, that choice becomes your responsibility. We have to look at it from that point of view, because if people ask me, who is responsible, presence or you, and all kinds of strange questions, the most useful approach is to see that you can choose to be present. That's your responsibility. Choose to be present in many, many situations in your daily life. Choose presence over useless thinking, for example. When you're in bed at night, when you wake up in the morning, when you're walking in nature or walking to work from here to there, or traveling on public transport, or sitting in your car, stopping at a red light, choose presence over thinking. You are able to do that. First, you have to remember that you have a choice. That comes one. Okay, I have a choice. And then exercise the choice and take your attention away from thinking and put your attention on attention itself. Become conscious of being conscious. From another perspective, which is also true and actually more true but less helpful, it is true to say that when you exercise your choice of being present, what is really happening is that presence is choosing to manifest through you. But what presence wants you is to feel that you can have that choice, because it helps it to manifest. Ultimately, there isn't you and presence. You are an aspect of presence. So, forget about what I just said, but exercise your choice to be present, no matter where you are. And if you lose it, fine. It's coming back again and again. Of course you will drift off again sometimes. You drift off into thinking. You may drift off into reactivity and find, and then come back. The moment you notice it, the moment you notice that you've drifted off into reactivity, your choice is to come back. If you cannot come back directly by saying, okay, I'll just be present, then use either your breath to bring you back, use the awareness of the inner body to bring you back, use some conscious movement to bring you back, or use sense perception to bring you back. Looking without labeling. It's all the especially natural things are helpful. You look at them, look at your dog. He's not thinking. So, and immediately, it's so easy to be present with an animal, with nature, with the sky. You can use those things as help. So if you need some additional help to be present, use that. I sometimes call that a portal into presence. There was a man working with Byron Katie, a spiritual teacher. The man was saying, if I had enough money, I would move to Hawaii, and that would be so great. That's my dream. And she said, well, what would you do in Hawaii? I said, well, I would sit in a deck chair by the beach or in my backyard and look at the palm trees, breathe. And she pointed out to him, well, where are you sitting now? Is the chair comfortable? Yeah. So what's wrong with that chair? How different would it be to have just a slightly different view around you? You can be in Hawaii now. It's an inner state. It's just the mind telling you you need to be somewhere else in order to be happy. You need to be somewhere else. It's here now. Why seek, postpone fulfillment to some future imagined point, not realizing that the source of all satisfaction is within you already. And then sense that as your very presence. And everything else, whatever happens or doesn't happen, you catch the bus or you miss the bus, you lose money, you gain money, up and down, hot and cold, that's all the details. This mind-made sense of self is also much more focused on the negative than the positive. To be free, you awaken to who you are beyond your history and your life situation.